Welcome to this presentation, viewers. This presentation is meant for all those of you who are aspiring to appear at the civil services exam. All the parents who would like their children to prepare in advance for the examination and help them in their preparation. And all those of you who are employed who would perhaps like to quit their present assignments and take up full-time preparation. The idea of this presentation is to give you a picture about what is important in the exam, how do you train yourself for that, and perhaps highlight what would not be very important at the exam also. So let us start with the presentation. As an example, let us take next year's examination. The notification will come out in February and you are expected to fill in your application, submit them online within a month. The preliminary will be held on the 25th of May, the results of which these days are coming out normally within a gap of 15 to 18 days, and the main exam is held for a period of 5 days from 22nd August. The results of which are again expected somewhere around December, January, and the personal interviews would start after that. So this whole phase of the examination, for those of you who are preparing for it, for those of you perhaps who would like to think about the time frame that is required, the exam itself demands a 1-year time frame. We are not talking about the preparation, we are only talking about the time frame of the examination. Just to clarify, the age limit, which all of you are maybe well aware, the minimum age is 21, which has been 21 for ever since perhaps the exam has started, except for minor changes for one or two services. And the maximum age as it stands today is 32. This is one of the highest that we've had across the years. And it is 32 plus whatever the provisions of the government would be. So candidates who belong to the general category would be getting a maximum age limit of 32. Candidates who belong to the other backward classes would be getting 3 more years, that is 35. Candidates with SC and ST reservation would be eligible up to the age of 37. And candidates who belong to the economically weaker sections, a new category which has been introduced recently, we would have the same age limits of the general category. The number of vacancies, which is of importance to you, which many people ignore, changes every year. It can be constant, it can come down, but in general, you have the highest number of vacancies right now. As you notice, in 2024, we've had 1056 vacancies. And there was a year like 2020 where you had 796. And in fact, as much as I remember, somewhere in the year 2000, we had something like about 2001, we had 265 vacancies. Your chances of qualifying at the examination are basically dependent upon the number of vacancies. Because U.P.S.C. filters people according to a certain ratio based on the number of vacancies. So whenever the vacancies are high, your chances of clearing the exam automatically increase. The eligibility criteria with reference to age, we mentioned it's 21, but a lot of people have this doubt, 21 when? Or the maximum age limit 32 when? U.P.S.C. takes 1st of August as its cutoff. This has been existing and this will not be changed. So please plan accordingly. Now coming to the scheme of examination. Everybody has an idea about the scheme. It is the prelims and the mains and the interview. How to prepare for each one is one issue. The most important issue is understanding which part of the examination is the most difficult. Which part of the examination would demand much more patience, many more skills, and perhaps also have a certain amount of luck. Now, why am I talking about luck or patience, etc.? Just look at the ratio, please. The number of selections are 1056. So U.P.S.C. goes by the ratio that they'll be taking about 13 times the number of vacancies. So whatever the number of people who apply for preliminary, the number of people who would qualify at the preliminary would come down by that ratio. So let's try to make it clear with figures. Let's look at this chart. Number of people who apply for this exam can be close to about 10 lakhs. Everybody, whoever is eligible, applies. But only 50% of them are known to have actually come and appeared at the examination. If you take the average for the last 2-3 years, All India average stands at somewhere around 48, 47, sometimes 45. So your competition is coming from 5 lakh. From this 5 lakh, you have 13,700 people being selected, and from the 13,700, about 2,500 to 2,700, between that would be the number of people who go to the interview. Finally, the number of people who would be selected will be around 1056, which can change by a bit, but normally it would be the same. Now, the number of vacancies in each service, all of us aspire to get into the top services. The I.A.S. has about 180 vacancies, which is considered to be quite high, and this has been there for quite some time. And the Indian Police Service, because of the requests of a lot of states that they require more personnel, it has come to about 200. So it would be the best time to appear at the exam when these kind of vacancies would be there. Now let's look at the preliminary examination. The preliminary examination, like we mentioned, has 2 papers, paper 1 and paper 2. Paper 1 has 100 questions, 2 marks each, totaling to 200. Paper 2 has 80 questions. Each correct answer would get you 2.5 marks, and it again totals to 200. So the preliminary exam is for 400 marks, but note what has been highlighted there. There is negative marking for each incorrect response. And negative marking has made a lot of difference between success and failure. Now, what are the areas that we have in paper 1? Paper 1 basically has about 7 areas, as you can see. From history of India to economy to general science and geography, including Indian polity. You will get questions from all these areas, which normally get related to the current affairs of that area. So these would be broadly the areas from which you will get your 100 questions. Paper 2 again has about comprehension, about 6 areas: comprehension, interpersonal skills, logical reasoning, mental ability, basic numeracy. Now what has happened is that initially when they gave the syllabus, we did have questions from interpersonal skills and decision making, what is highlighted in red. Later on, while they were correcting the papers, they realized that these are areas which are subjective. Any question could have 2 different answers, and both the answers could be right. Hence, though it is mentioned in the syllabus, we have not been getting questions from these areas. So when you're preparing, please prepare for basic numeracy, mental ability, logical reasoning, and comprehension. This paper, while it is qualifying, and you have to get 67 out of 200 to qualify, cannot be taken easily, cannot be taken for granted. The paper is becoming tougher year by year. Now, why is that? The scheme of the exam is such that the U.P.S.C would have to eliminate close to something like about 4,90,000 people in case 5 lakh people plus are writing. So they have this job, a very difficult job of setting questions in such a way that they are able to eliminate. So the preliminary basically becomes an area where it becomes a sort of an elimination. While we don't use the word elimination, but the fact is that they would like to reduce the numbers to something which is manageable, and that has an effect on the marks that you get. Now, second paper, get your qualifying marks, and then they would move to paper 1 and make sure that you will have to get your marks here. Now, it is paper 1 that matters. Please remember, it is paper 1 that matters as long as you get your minimum marks in paper 2. Now, let's look at some sample questions in paper 1. These are what I would call as simple questions. Which of the following Asian towns is well known for its elaborate system of water harvesting? Now, why was this question asked? Now, this question was asked basically because Dholavira, which is the answer, was in the news. that year. So connecting it to current affairs, they asked a question in history. If we get these type of questions, it's quite simple. We don't have a problem. This is what came out in the Hindu, specifically giving all the details, and the question perhaps definitely would have been asked because this was in the news. So fine, we get a idea that you have to read the newspaper regularly and try to link it up with the areas given in the syllabus. That is one lesson that you have to learn. At the same time, just look at, you get another set of questions which don't have one single answer, but then would have a combination of answers. It is these questions that create a problem. Please have a look at this question, and especially those of you who have a background in Indian polity or have done their arts in Indian polity, arts in their degree with Indian polity as a subject, or maybe would have definitely done this part somewhere in 10th standard, try to go in for an answer. And when we ask most of the people to answer, the answer that we get is only one. A is right. Very quickly, the candidate would answer that A is right. Now let's look at the actual answer. The actual answer, notice, says it is D, neither 1 nor 2. Now why? A very simple change. Your statement says executive power of the Union of India is vested in the Prime Minister, but according to the Constitution says it is vested in the President of India. A very simple change. One word has been changed. President has been made Prime Minister and we make a mistake. Something which you know, but you make a mistake. The second one is, of course, somebody who prepares the governance part is somebody who will know this. But I'm just trying to point out how a seemingly simple question can make a difference and you could make a mistake. Now look at this, the other type of questions. Question says, what is the chief purpose of a constitution of a country? Determining the objectives for making laws, right? Creation of political offices and a government, oh yes, definitely. Defines the limits and powers of the government and secures social justice. All four appear to be correct, right? Prima facie, all four appear to be correct. You have to choose the best answer. Quite a lot of books on Indian polity perhaps don't clarify the exact answer or give it to you. They give it in different forms. And the actual answer is there, for example, in this book. Now, why I am flashing the book and why am I trying to point out this is that this is a book which has been published by Publications Division, Government of India. The title of the book is Our Constitution and the author is Subhash Kashyap. Now, in this book, right in the first few pages, he talks about what is the Constitution and very clearly mentions, and you get your answer, C, which is the answer given in the key given by U.P.S.C. So the point here is, number one, please read the basic textbooks. It is very important. When you're taking up a word that is mentioned, and here in this example, a term that is mentioned in the Constitution, read the exact meaning of the word. Okay? So reading books, textbooks, original books would make a lot of difference. You could read study material, you could read the notes, but please do read these books. Now let's look at some questions that came in history about 3 years back. Maybe. This is there in the basic NCERT book. You could go in for an answer. This was another question that came in. Difficult for every student who looked at it that year, because perhaps majority of them never went through this. And then a third question that came the same year, was this question which talked about the Rakhmabai case. In fact, recently in the Hindu also, there was a mention of this. There's been a book that has been released on this year. But this question came about 3 years back. And all these questions would not appear in any of the guides that year. Later, they could have been included. Would not appear in any of the study material that you will be reading. But the questions came in. Now, where were the questions taken from? Now, when an examiner in U.P.S.C. is asked to set questions, he is specifically told that please take the questions from a standard textbook. Don't create questions on your own, because the question and the answer can always be challenged in a court of law. You could also go in for any other remedy, But UPSC has to be very, very careful. So the examiner basically would be setting questions from standard books only. Now let's look at where this question was taken from. This question was taken from this book, History of Modern India by Ishita Banerjee Dubey, and the publisher is Cambridge. Point to be learnt here, that when you're reading, please read books that have been recommended by a university for an honors course. This is recommended, one of the recommended books by major universities, and also the book would normally be published by a reputed publisher. So questions come from there. It's not possible always to read all the books, but please have a look at the standard books that have been recommended by the university for normally an honors course in arts, in that specific subject. It could be history, it could be polity, whatever it is. So notice that the cutoff for the prelims is far below what we think we can achieve. In 2023, the general category cutoff was about 75.41 out of 200. Do you think it's that difficult to achieve? People would say, very easy for me. 75 is nothing. In my college, in my university, I've scored so high. But getting these marks becomes very, very difficult at the preliminary in paper 1. This is the cutoffs of paper 1, please. Paper 2 has a standard cutoff. These are the cutoffs of paper 1. And why do you find decimals? This is because of the negative marking that comes in. Point to be noted, what happens with most of the students is that they are able to answer a lot of questions, correct? Maybe half of them. 40 out of 100 or somewhere around 50 out of 100 they are able to answer. But after that, they start answering more, and that is where they get their negative marks. A certain amount of guessing is necessary in this exam, but wild guessing is what gets you below the cutoff and you lose your chances. So getting these marks is more than sufficient, and please understand what you have to know is that you will not be able to answer all the questions. Your objective of looking at the prelims, preparing for the prelims, is to get the minimum qualifying marks, because the marks in the prelims are not added to your mains. So you should have an idea about all the areas mentioned. UPSC does not have any specific numbers that there'll be 10 questions from this area, 15 from the other. It all depends on how they would like to set the paper. And as I repeat, the paper is set based on the level of competition, how many vacancies are there, and how it would make it easy for them to eliminate students and bring down the students to a manageable number. Once you qualify the prelims, you go to the mains. Logically, if you look at the marks, technically, mains is far, far easier than the prelim. Why? You have so many papers. The first 2 papers which are qualifying, the balance of the papers which count for your merit, if you don't do well in one paper, you could always compensate in the other. So you have all the papers, and you have the advantage that the combined score is taken. While there is a minimum in each paper, the minimum is quite less. You don't have to worry about that. But it is a combined score that is taken. So in case you lose out in, let's say, the second paper, governance, you can perhaps make up in the paper on ethics. Now you will have to qualify at this, know how the examiner looks at the entire examination. The examiner looks at how they would look at the answers written and how they would give you marks. Please remember, there is always, the examiner has a right to impose penalty marks. And why are these penalty marks given? Penalty marks are given for certain specific things. But one example I can give you is, there is a certain specific space given to you to write an answer. And in case you cross that, you are awarded penalty marks. There are people who have got something like about 25 to 27 penalty marks. So you also have to be careful about that. Some people have a doubt regarding the modern Indian language that they have to take. They have a problem regarding whether they should take their mother tongue or some other subject. It all depends on which subject you have done up to your 10th standard. This is again a qualifying paper. Basically, you get questions from 5 areas, and in all this, there are certain marks that are allocated. So how to score this paper and why you need not worry too much about it? Practice, a bit. Okay, focus on areas where you'll get your marks. Translation from English, translation to English, words into sentences. These are areas that will get you marks. And if you're able to get your minimum, that's more than sufficient. Extra work is normally not required for this, except a bit of writing practice before the examination. English would have comprehension of given passages, précis writing, usage and vocabulary, and short essay. The same formula works. It's not very difficult. The only point is that please, based on the experience of people who have written this exam, based on the experience of people who have not qualified in these parts, remember, there are people who didn't qualify in this, is that please write the entire paper for 3 hours. Okay? So look at the distribution that you will get in English. It is the same, like your modern Indian language. So not a very difficult paper to qualify and get the minimum qualifying marks, whichever medium you're writing the exam in. Minimum qualifying marks would be 75 out of 300. That being the qualifying marks, now let's look at what is expected out of a candidate at the mains. Marks are given for the number of points that appear in your answer. Generally, when we get, mains is basically what we call a short essay these days when you look at general studies. And in the short essays, you get questions, normally 20 marks, and you are awarded marks according to the number of points that you write. So let's take this as a sample question. You don't get such simple questions, direct questions, but it will be easier for you to understand how perhaps the marks would be given. What would you write when you get this question? I'll think of earthquakes, I'll think of flora and fauna, and then my mind goes blank. I keep repeating the same thing. I would perhaps start with what is ecology and then talk about dams and then write about these things. By the time I would have finished the 1.5 pages that is given to me. Now it is here that you have to understand that they give you marks for the points. And let's look at what are the points that they would be looking at for this 20-mark question. As a hypothesis, we'll say 20 marks and there are 20 points for this question. Purely as a hypothesis. And let's look at the 20 points. Upstream, you have 12. Notice, different points are coming out. Points are not getting repeated. Just have a look at the points. Upstream has 12. Downstream has 8. Logically, the paper setter would perhaps ask or give suggestions to the people who are correcting the answer paper that if all these points are mentioned, you can give the marks to the student, full marks. Now, practically, it is not possible for any student to be able to write all the 20. You don't have to worry about it. The topper also perhaps would answer about 7 out of this. The only point to be noted here is make sure that you mention as many points as possible. You can use any type of presentation, point-wise presentation or an essay type presentation. You don't get time for an essay type presentation, but the examiner would basically look for the points that you have mentioned. Okay, so upstream 12, downstream 8, write all of them, you get your full marks, and it is almost next to impossible to be able to write all the 20 points. The essay, the area which has been quite scoring, which we always advise students that they should practice and they should try to get the best of marks possible. The essays have now become philosophical topics, philosophical areas, and you're basically supposed to pick up, there are 2 sections given in the paper and you're supposed to pick up 1 question from each section and move on. The choice of your topic can make a difference in your marks and the way you deal with it. But this has to be written like any normal essay that you would write or would have written in your 10th standard. What I mean to say is you'll have to have an introduction, a proper body and a conclusion and also have points. Paper 1, look at the kind of questions that are coming out. One specific year is which I've taken. Questions are not direct. Okay. Questions are indirect, which would require a lot of reading and ability to comprehend, right? Safeguarding Indian art heritage is the need of the moment. So you will have to specifically mention all the points that are required. Paper 2, though perhaps corrected to current affairs, they say what are the methods used by farmers' organizations to influence the policymakers? This is when perhaps the agitation was going on and then let's say farmers' organizations had certain demands. So no question is generally direct. All questions will be general, which means your reading has to be very, very broad-based. Paper 3, Paper 4. A paper that has been introduced when the pattern was changed, which basically focuses on ethics, integrity, and aptitude for civil services. Underline for civil services. So the entire paper will basically, you will have to orient your answers according to civil services. So look at the questions. Some questions which talk about what is code of ethics, what is dedication, how would you look at it? And a question which is very general, which talks about all human beings aspire for happiness. And it could be a question that came out because we are talking about what is called as an index for how happy a country is. However, the question says, what does happiness mean to you? So you'll have to tackle it, keeping in view what is required as a quality for a civil servant. Now, what is required as a quality for a civil servant? It is basically sensitivity to the problems of people. It is basically empathy. And it's basically being able to understand, comprehend, and solve the issue. Now, for example, one candidate, if you have a question like, what does money mean to you? A lot of people are asked this question. I mean, it didn't come in the exam, but I'm just giving it to you as an example. Look at how well it has been articulated. What does money mean to you? You can't generally say money doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not bothered about it. You will have to be honest. At the same time, tune your answer in such a way that it fits into the stream of civil services. Look at the points, please. Money is freedom, and freedom means the ability to do something that I want. I get happiness by doing something for the society. Money helps me to pursue a little bit of philanthropy, educate the underprivileged, etc. See the tone that the writer proceeds. And then the writer also becomes slightly personal because they said, what does money mean to you? He gives a reason that he says, recently one of my friends who's rich lost a close relative to a terminal disease. And that is when I realized that money, irrespective of the money that you have, it means little if it has no purpose. And then the last line, he writes, when I give back to society, it makes me happy to see those smiles. Don't you think the answer fits in very well into the scheme of exam? Forget about the exam, don't you think the answer is something which has been well thought of and well written? These are the kind of answers that you'll have to write. Especially all the questions in this paper talk about what it means to you. What it means to you, you'll have to orient it with reference to the objectives of the civil services. You also get quotations like this in that paper, which basically come from thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi. All the most important thinkers across the world, the quotations that they've given could come here. And again, look at the point. What does it mean to you? That is important. You have to be short, you have to be crisp, and at the same time, you should be able to deliver or give what the examiner requires. Point to be known, point to be noted again, is this is a very scoring paper, often neglected by a lot of students because they feel they can write whatever they want. Please remember, no, you will have to give extra attention to this and do quite a bit of writing practice for this paper. But this is the paper that could give you all your rewards. You also have case studies here, and look at one of the case studies which they have given. I've changed it slightly, but this was given as a sample when the paper was introduced. In a very simple way, the case study demands or projects a scenario where a very close friend of yours, and friendship means a lot, especially during the initial years of formation, school, college, etc. Basically is unable to appear or write in the examination, and in the exam he or she is not unprepared, and then he requests you to give your answer sheet for copying. What would you do and why? Logically here you cannot say, I will share my paper. It would be morally wrong. So how would you tackle this? Closely look at the question. It says it comes to an internal exam. An internal exam is an exam which is conducted by a college or a university or your class. So what would be a proper answer? An answer which would be acceptable, which would be right, is that you go to the examiner concerned, the teacher or the principal, along with your student, along with your friend, and explain the problem and request them if another exam could be conducted for them. And then you will also try to help him or her prepare for the other examinations. That would show that you're not compromising on your ethics. At the same time, you're finding a solution to the problem. Having answered all the questions, all the papers, what would the cutoff that is required? 1750 was the total for the main, and what you need to qualify and go to the interview is 741. Again, not a very great percentage. Getting these marks is again very, very difficult. Notice the cutoffs from 2020 to 2023. You're getting 736 to 741. It's going in the same range. Why does it come down or why does it go up? Depends on competition, depends on how it has been corrected. But ultimately, notice it's in a broad range, and the range is at this level. Getting these marks is difficult. Getting these marks would qualify you for the interview, but getting only minimum marks would not be able to get you a service, even though you can do very well you might do very well in the interview. The reason being, this is the minimum marks. You'll have to get much more than this. Much more would not be very, very high because most of the candidates will be bunched together in a very, very small bandwidth. So these are the marks that you have to get to go to the interview. Marks in the interview and marks in what you've scored in the main will be added, and the final result comes out. Now here, especially I would like to point out, the personality test has 275 marks. There's a lot of hype around the personality test, the kind of questions that are asked. Let me tell you, in this scheme of examination, if you are able to clear the prelims, if you are able to clear the main, personality test perhaps would be the easiest. The reason is questions are asked from your background, questions are asked from, let's say, current affairs, and you would have already accumulated a lot of knowledge if you've been able to clear the prelim and the main. So looking at being able to answer the personality test would not be an issue if you prepare properly. Personality test demands certain skills, a certain amount of practice, which if you prepare properly, you'll have to look at what questions can be asked, prepare answers for that, practice those answers, and then when you go there, if you're able to deliver that, you can get very good marks. People have scored up to 225 plus out of 275. One of the highest scores is what I'm talking about. But average, if you can get something around 180, 190, you are assured of a good service. Personality test has, I repeat, people think it is the most difficult thing. It is not. You should be able to answer, and it is much more predictable and perhaps much more easier than clearing the prelims. Now, the minimum marks that you have to get when your marks in the main are added to the marks in the personality test. That is, in the general category, it was 953. It differs according to the categories. If you get these kind of marks, you will be able to get some service or the other. This will be the last 953 would be what we call as the cutoff marks for getting a service. And this would make you eligible for, and you'll perhaps be in the end of the list. If you want to be in the top, you'll definitely have to get something much more. Again, notice it is 953 out of your adding up marks in the main and marks in the interview. So the point to be noted is U.P.S.C. is very strict in its correction, and getting these kind of marks itself is difficult. And again, it's more than sufficient. We find statements being made that U.P.S.C. topper has scored only 50%. 50% is very, very difficult to get when your entire paper is of social sciences. When your entire correction process is specific to the point and point based, it is very, very difficult to get those kind of marks. And basically, please understand, we don't need more marks. Here, your marks, your service depends upon how the others have done. So we'll go by the relative competition, and you should be there if you get, higher marks than what is the cutoff. And now this preparation for U.P.S.C, there is always a chance element in competitive examinations. There's always an element of practice that is required. So we always suggest students that they should appear at the state service examinations. Now, state service examinations are generally patterned around, have the same kind of syllabus like the civil services. This has been done deliberately. One, to make sure that an aspirant has and is eligible for similar services. Second, as the same preparation will work for both. The only difference is that every state will have its own areas, especially if you notice the last three. Questions are asked from the economy of the state, questions are asked from the history of the state, and from the geography of the state. Point that I would like to make here is that state services are as good as U.P.S.C. Okay? And all the aspirants who are appearing or preparing for U.P.S.C. should also look at what are their chances of making it in the state services. Chances depend upon whether you're a local or a non-local, how frequently the exam comes in, and maybe a few other factors. However, the bottom line would be that you prepare for the civil services, but write all the other examinations, especially examinations for employment in the government. Most of them are patterned similarly, and this knowledge is sufficient for that. That gives you a lot of practice. And this practice will basically help you when you keep writing the civil services. As we said, civil services might take 2 attempts or 3 attempts. Or even when you go for the interview, when a question is asked that what have you been doing all these years, you can always tell the board that you have been successful at other examinations. The logic is that if a board at the state level has found you to be good, they found you to be eligible for the state services, you're already starting with an advantage. And then the board will also look at you in a much more favorable way when they have to give you marks. So this is the examination, friends. Based on this, you can decide your method of preparation. We will maybe at a later date talk about how to go in for each of these stages. But for the present, when you have to decide whether to take the exam or not to take the exam, that will be people who would leave a lucrative job and come and write the examination. In case you are preparing for degree, how to prepare for this. Okay. Why it takes a slightly long period of time as compared to the other exams, and how do you tune your preparation. At the end, what I would like to say is that it is not a very difficult examination if you understand the exam and you prepare properly for it. And yes, it takes time. Have the patience. You will definitely reach your goal. The presentation has been quite long, but I hope it has clarified a lot of points for all the aspirants who would like to appear at this exam, who harbor many a doubt regarding the examination, and you are clear about the path that you have to take. All the best, and let's see you in the next video.